In February 1943, the German Field Marshal Manstein got the approval of Hitler to launch a counter-offensive on the southern front. On February 21st, the 4th Panzer Army started the offensive and reoccupied Kharkiv and Belgrade. The Red Army fell back to Kursk, and soon after that, military action stopped due to the spring mud season, known as Rasputitsa, preventing the movement of armor and infantry. On the 15th of April, Hitler organized Operation Zitadella.
You hear this quite often about the mud on the Eastern Front. Weren't any of these roads tarmacked? Or were the tanks running over these tarmac roads and just chewing them up, so they're just turning them into mush? I did hear one of the issues with Barbarossa is that the lack of reliable maps was one thing, and also the dirt roads,
which sought the encirclement of 5 Soviet armies in the Kursk area from the north and the south. These groups were supposed to meet in the east of Kursk with an aim to encircle the Red Army defending it.
I don't like to judge people by looking at their faces, but when we look at this guy here, look at this guy. He looks like a Bond villain. And then we look at this guy too. I don't have high hopes for the Germans here, okay? And this guy, he looks like he's wearing a monocle. Guys, these look like bad guys in a movie, okay? I know who the winners and the losers are here.
The Soviets possessed intelligence indicating that the German army was preparing for a major offensive. Zhukov persuaded Stalin to wait for the German offensive instead of striking first. He aimed to wear the Germans out, knock out as many tanks as possible, and then use the first chance for a decisive counteroffensive. So the Soviets proceeded to build defensive structures, fortifications, minefields, and anti-tank obstacles.
What if the Germans won the Battle of Kursk decisively? They achieved all their objectives, and the Soviets got absolutely obliterated. That would have caused a stalemate on the Eastern Front, right? Because at the minute, the Soviets have the advantage. That would have caused an absolute stalemate between East and West. How would that have changed the overall outcome of the war? Would it have just slowed the decline of Germany's defeat? Or would it have created a stalemate? Could they have potentially won? Would they still have lost anyway? Would have they lost slower? Or would it have created a stalemate where World War II would still exist today?
In preparation for the German offensive, the Soviets employed partisan tactics behind German lines to disrupt supplies and communications for the German armies.
It's such a shame in Hoi 4 you don't have the ability to do stuff like this. The operations are just too a pain in the ass to pull off, aren't they? Sure, you can create resistance, but resistance doesn't even do that much. It's just a shame you don't have the ability to plan offenses by using spies as extra levels. I don't know, it's just something.
Since partisans were able to destroy 298 locomotives,
Wow.
1,222 railway wagons, and 44 bridges, which delayed the German offensive.
Wow!
In total, the Germans had up to 780,000 men, and around 3,000 tanks available for the Kursk offensive, while the Red Army possessed up to 2 million men and over 5,000 tanks. The manpower and armor advantage
I know where
for
I've got
the
my money on.
Soviets was overwhelming. The preliminary engagements started on the 4th of July 1943. This was followed by a panzer attack by the Panzer Grenadier Division Grossdeutschland, which succeeded in capturing Batovo village and Gotovska despite heavy losses due to fierce Soviet resistance and minefields. 36 panzers were immobilized due to mines in just one episode on the left flank of the attack.
36?
Grossdeutschland reached Mikhailovka on the left and Tirechnoe on the right. To the east, the 2nd SS Panzer Corps managed to break through the first line of defense, but the Red Army's resistance and the inability of the 3rd SS Division to advance together with the rest of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps stopped the advance short of breaching the 2nd defensive line and exposed the right flank of the offensive to the Soviet troops. Parts of Army Detachment Kempf succeeded in forcing the River Donets and advancing up to 10 kilometers on parts of the front. But again, Soviet resistance, defensive constructions, and disadvantageous terrain halted the overall progress of the Wehrmacht, and they fell short of breaching the second line of Soviet defense. Up north, the 47th Panzer Corps started their advance on July 5th. The Red Army's 15th Rifle Division, minefields, and strong fortifications slowed the German advance. 90 T-34 tanks were sent by the Soviets to confront the Tigers, But after a 3-hour battle, the Soviets had lost 40 tanks, while the Germans lost only 7.
The theories are true, guys. The T-34s are pieces of crap.
The fierce resistance by the Soviets and defensive fortifications allowed the Germans only a minor advance of 10 kilometers.
You know how crappy T-34s are because there are statues of T-34s, ex-models that have been gutted all over the place. Like when I went to Berlin, there was, I think I can count 4 or maybe 5 T-34s that are like memorials to World War II of like the Soviets liberating Berlin. And after the war was ended, like the Soviets were like, yeah, we know these tanks are a piece of shit and we're not using them anymore.
Initially, the Soviet 16th Tank Corps went on a counter-offensive, facing the 505th Heavy Tank Battalion of the Wehrmacht. The Soviets had to retreat after losing 69 tanks. Later that day, the Germans tried to break Soviet defences in Orlovatka and Ponary, but the Red Army stood firm. Over the next 3 days, the German army continued its attack on strategically important Orlovatka and Ponary.
Can you see the biggest flaw of this plan? Can anyone spot what it is? For me, it seems blatantly obvious, but of course we've got the hindsight, the fact this happened 70 years ago, and the fact that the guy who's narrated this has told us. But the downside to this is that the Soviets knew they were coming. They had enough time to, like, plant landmines. You know what I mean? The Germans weren't using amphibious AA tanks. Got him. The deal is this wasn't going to work because the Soviets knew they were coming.
By July 10th, after heavy house-to-house fighting, the Germans were able to capture most of Ponary.
The biggest flaw is they were literally Nazis.
But were not able to penetrate the Soviet defences in Orlovatka. Still, the Soviets were suffering heavy losses in their attempts to halt the German advance. As a consequence, forces of the reserve of the Steppe Front were sent to reinforce the defence against the 48th Panzer Corps, which was one defensive belt away from breaking through to the Soviets' unfortified rear. The 5th Guards, 2nd Guards and 2nd and 10th Tank Corps of the Soviet Army were ordered to move towards Korocha, 40 kilometers southeast of Prokhorovka, to confront the 2nd SS Panzer Corps on the 8th of July. The Soviet counter-offensive ended in failure due to poor coordination. 50 Soviet tanks were destroyed by the Luftwaffe, which marked the first time in history when a whole tank formation was destroyed by airstrikes alone.
Wow.
This counter-offensive slowed down the German advance, but by July 11th, Army Detachment Kempf managed to break through, while the 2nd SS Panzer Corps was ordered to move towards Prokhorovka. For the Battle of Prokhorovka, the Germans had 294 tanks, while 616 were at the disposal of the Red Army. On the 12th of July, about 500 tanks and self-propelled guns of the Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army started their attack on the 2nd SS Panzer Corps. 430 of them were in the 1st Echelon and 70 in the 2nd. They attacked the positions of the Liebstandarte Division. The 1st SS Panzer Regiment was sent to confront them. After a 3-hour battle, the 1st SS Panzer Regiment reported the destruction of as many as 62 Soviet tanks and repulsed their attack. Nevertheless, later in the afternoon of that day, tanks from the 31st Tank Brigade and the 53rd Motorized Brigade defeated elements of the 1st SS Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion and reached Komsomolets State Farm, which put the Liebstandarte's communication lines and overall operations in grave danger. 4 Tiger tanks engaged in battle with the Soviets' 181st Tank Brigade in an attempt to protect the left flank of Liebstandarte. They successfully repelled the Soviet attack, inflicted heavy losses, and managed to stay unharmed in this skirmish. After that, elements of the Soviet 170th Tank Brigade attacked the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, which was already engaged with the 31st and 32nd Tank Brigades. Despite losing its commander and about 30 tanks in the fight, the 170th Tank Brigade pushed the 1st SS Panzer Regiment back and reached the position of the 1st SS Panzer Reconnaissance Battalion. Soon the 170th and 181st Tank Brigades breached the German line connecting Totenkopf and Liebstandarte, but were eventually pushed back to the village of Andriivka.
Here's one thing that I can't get my head around sometimes. The concept of a tank retreating. Surely the vehicle has so much more agility and movement when it is facing in the direction it's going. Because I have this a vision in my head of a tank basically reversing. I feel like I understand the concept of a person running away because we have a really quick turning circle on two legs, you know what I mean? A vehicle like a tank, a heavy vehicle, I feel like it's way more difficult to retreat that kind of vehicle. Hence Dunkirk, you know what I mean? I feel like a lot of the equipment was left behind, you know? The person can run away, so just leave the tank behind. I don't know, it makes me think, you know, like how many of the tank carcasses were left behind? Maybe potentially working vehicles. I don't know.
The Soviets suffered heavy tank losses in the Battle of Prokhorovka. The estimates of permanently or temporarily damaged tanks are between 330 and 650, while the Germans lost 60 to 80 tanks. The biggest tank battle in military history had ended with a staggering difference in losses for the two sides, and it might look like the Wehrmacht gained from it. But despite heavy losses, the Soviets were able to stall the German advance, significantly drain its resources, and create ground for a successful counter-offensive. The Battle of Prokhorovka, along with the Allied invasion of Sicily, led to the abandoning of...
This map is awfully coloured. The colour of the sea should be a different colour. I feel like I see the Black Sea and I'm like, oh, the country of the Black Sea. I'm like, oh no, it's a sea.
Operation Citadel and offensive operations. The Germans now became defensive. To the north of Kursk, the Soviets launched Operation Kutuzov on the 12th of July. As a result, German Army Group Center was pushed back by the Bryansk front and by the Western Front. It was followed by Operation Rumyantsev, conducted by the Voronezh Front and Steppe Front in an attempt to destroy the 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf, and cut off the extended southern portion of Army Group South from the rest of the German army. Despite a relatively successful start by the Germans, the vast manpower resources and increasing military-industrial potential of the Soviets proved to be too much for the German army. Despite heavy losses, the Red Army was able to push back and liberate some of its territories.
6,000 tanks lost? Compared to the 760? Oh, it's assault guns as well. Oh, but that can be tank destroyers, can't it? Or SPGs. 760 lost on Germany? 6,000 for the Soviets. Oh my goodness. T-34 is the Zergling rush, isn't it?
Emerging problems in Italy forced Hitler to further weaken his troops on the Eastern Front and transfer some of them to the Western Front. The noose was getting tighter.
You know what? I watched a lot of these videos, and this one is actually a little bit not as good quality as some of the other ones. I feel like this battle here is not represented very visually very well. I feel like it'd be kind of cool if it showed the actual number of losses for the individual battalions to get a bit of representation of the losses. I was underwhelmed by the losses until I saw this final screen here and show the actual numbers. And I was like, 6,000 tanks? What the fuck? No one fucks with the Soviet Union, boyos. Production power of that nation. Oof. Hey guys, if you enjoyed this react video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to check out Kings and Generals. They're very, 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 very good most of the time. Hey, you made it to the end. Now, this is the video you want.